Supreme Commander Razak stood motionless on the bridge of his flagship, Eclipse of Dominion, his imposing figure casting long shadows under the cold, artificial light. His crimson-scaled armor shimmered faintly, a stark contrast to the dark void of space beyond the viewing window. Before him stretched the vast Clyson Armada 250 warships, each a towering colossus of destruction. Their sleek, obsidian hulls absorbed the starlight, creating an eerie aura as if the stars themselves recoiled in fear of their presence. Razak's yellow eyes burned with intensity as he studied the tactical display projected before him. His gaze was sharp, unwavering, like a predator assessing its prey. The faint hum of machinery filled the room, but it was drowned out by the weight of his words as he spoke, his voice calm yet brimming with authority. "The humans will be just another conquest," he declared, his tone carrying an air of inevitability. For decades, the Clyson Empire had expanded its dominion, crushing civilizations, and scattering their remnants across the stars. Humanity, he believed, would be no different, just another name added to the list of fallen species. The bridge was silent, save for the faint clicking of Zinara's claws against the control panel as she worked. Razak's communications officer, a slender being with pale green skin and delicate antennae, shifted uneasily. Her antennae twitched, a subtle sign of apprehension as she turned to face her commander. "Supreme Commander," she began, her voice careful and measured, "we've received a priority transmission from the Arith Coalition." Razak's lip curled in disdain, revealing sharp, ivory teeth. The Arith were a species shrouded in mystery and age-old wisdom, their warnings often cryptic and unwelcome. Known for their reluctance to interfere in galactic affairs, the Arith rarely reached out, and when they did, their messages carried an unsettling weight. Razak's irritation was palpable as he barked, "Put it through." The room dimmed as the screen flickered to life, revealing the shadowed figure of Elder Myroth. Cloaked in flowing gray robes that seemed to ripple like mist, the ancient being exuded an aura of timelessness. His face was partially obscured, his features etched with lines that spoke of countless years and unspoken burdens. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, carrying the weight of millennia. Each word seemed to echo within the minds of those who heard it, as if the very fabric of reality bent to his will. "Supreme Commander Razak," Myroth began, his tone calm yet firm, "I bring you a warning. Do not attack the humans. They are not like the others you have conquered." The bridge fell silent. Razak's officers exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence shaken by the ancient being's grave words. Even Zinara's antennae froze, her nervous energy dissipating as Myroth's voice filled the room. There was something unsettling about his presence, as if he spoke not just from knowledge but from experience, an experience that transcended time itself. Razak, however, was unmoved. A low, guttural laugh escaped his lips, cutting through the tension like a blade. "The Arith have grown timid in their isolation," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Your warnings mean nothing to me. The humans will fall, just as all the others have." Myroth did not react to the insult. His expression remained calm, his gaze steady, as if he had seen such arrogance countless times before. "You do not understand," he said softly, his voice carrying an ominous undertone. "Humans are unlike any species you have encountered. Their strength does not lie in their technology or their strategies. It lies in their unity. When threatened, they will not fight for survival alone, they will fight for each other. Their vengeance will be relentless, and their resolve unbreakable. If you attack them, they will hunt you across the stars. They will never stop until justice is served." Razak's lip curled further, his disdain now bordering on fury. "Enough of this nonsense," he snapped, cutting off the transmission with a flick of his clawed hand. The screen went dark, and the room returned to its cold, sterile silence. His officers remained quiet, their unease lingering in the air like a shadow. Zinara hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Commander," she said cautiously, "perhaps we should reconsider?" Razak turned sharply, his piercing gaze silencing her mid-sentence. "No," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "The Irith are relics of a bygone era. Their warnings are nothing but the ramblings of cowards. Prepare the fleet. We strike Haven 7 first." As the commander's orders echoed through the bridge, the Clyson Armada began its preparations for war. The silence of the stars was soon replaced by the hum of engines and the crackle of energy weapons charging. Razak stood tall, his confidence unwavering, but the faint traces of Elder Myratha's warning lingered in the minds of his officers. Far away, in the depths of the galaxy, Elder Myratha sat silently in his chamber, his gaze fixed on the distant stars. "They will learn," he whispered to himself, his voice heavy with sorrow. "But it will be too late." Elder Myratha's voice, low and resonant, cut through the cold stillness of the Clyson flagship's bridge like the first crack of thunder before a storm. His tone, once calm and measured, grew sharper, each word carrying an almost tangible weight. "You do not understand," he said, his deep voice laced with something ancient, something that felt like both wisdom and sorrow. "Humans fight not for resources, not for glory, but for one another. Their strength lies not in their weapons or ships, but in their hearts. When their families are threatened, they become relentless. They do not retreat. They do not forgive." The room grew colder, as if the very air had been drained of warmth. Myratha's shadowed face seemed to loom larger on the screen, his words echoing as if spoken from the depths of time itself. "If you attack them," he continued, his voice now carrying a foreboding edge, "they will hunt you across the stars. They will never stop. Not until every last one of you is brought to justice." The final word lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating, like the weight of a distant storm pressing down on the horizon. Then, without warning, the transmission ended. The screen went dark, leaving the bridge bathed in an eerie silence. For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of the ship's systems seemed louder than usual, filling the void left by Myratha's ominous warning. The officers stationed around the bridge exchanged uneasy glances, their usual confidence shaken. Even Zinara, who rarely showed any emotion beyond her dutiful professionalism, appeared tense. Her antennae twitched erratically, betraying her inner turmoil. Finally, one of the younger officers, his voice hesitant and unsure, broke the silence. "Sir," he began, his words faltering as Razak's piercing yellow eyes turned toward him. Should we reconsider our approach?" Razak's expression hardened, his features sharp and unyielding like chiseled stone. His gaze bore into the officer, silencing him with its intensity. The commander's jaw tightened, his crimson-scaled armor catching the dim light as he straightened to his full height. "No," he said, his voice cold and resolute, cutting through the tension like a blade. He turned his back to the officers, his gaze fixed on the tactical display that floated before him. The holographic map of the galaxy shimmered faintly, the human territories glowing softly in blue amidst the vast sea of Clyson-controlled space. Razak's clawed hand hovered over the display, his fingers curling into a fist. "The Irith," he growled, his tone dripping with disdain, "are relics of a bygone era. Their words are nothing more than the ramblings of cowards who have hidden in the shadows for far too long." The officers remained silent, their unease palpable. Though none dared to speak, the weight of Myratha's warning lingered in their minds. It was as if the elder's words had planted a seed of doubt, one that now threatened to take root. Razak's voice broke through their thoughts, sharp and commanding. "Humanity will kneel before the Clyson Empire," he declared, his tone brooking no argument. His clawed hand swept across the tactical display, highlighting a small, isolated colony near the edge of human space. The hologram zoomed in, revealing a lush, green world surrounded by faint defensive rings. Haven 7, Razak said, his voice steady and deliberate. A weak colony. An easy target. We will strike there first. He turned to face his officers, his gaze sweeping across the room like a predator surveying its territory. Prepare the fleet, he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. We will show the humans what it means to defy the Clyson Empire. The officers snapped to attention, their earlier hesitation buried beneath the force of Razak's command. One by one, they returned to their stations, the bridge coming alive with activity as preparations for the assault began. But as Zinara turned back to her console, her fingers moving deftly across the controls, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her chest. Myratha's warning echoed in her mind, his deep, resonant voice refusing to be silenced. Asterisk, they will never stop. Not until every last one of you is brought to justice. Asterisk. Far away, in the quiet solitude of his chamber, Elder Myrath sat in meditation. His ancient eyes gazed into the infinite expanse of stars, his expression somber. He did not need to see the future to know what would come next. The Clyson Empire, for all its might and arrogance, had set itself on a path that could not be undone. They will learn, Myrath murmured softly, his voice heavy with sorrow. But they will learn too late. The Clyson fleet emerged from hyperspace like a storm breaking over a quiet sea, their massive black ships blotting out the stars above Haven 7. The agricultural colony, nestled on the edge of human-controlled space, was a tranquil world of rolling green fields, sparkling rivers, and golden plains swaying in the breeze. Its people had lived in peace for generations, their lives shaped by the rhythms of planting and harvest. But now, that peace was shattered. The first strike came without warning. Blinding beams of energy lanced through the void, slamming into the orbital platform that served as the colony's first and only line of defense. The platform crumbled under the barge, its metal skeleton twisting and breaking apart as explosions rippled across its surface. Patrol ships scrambled to respond, their smaller, nimbler forms darting through the chaos like fireflies in a storm. But they were no match for the Clyson warships. One by one, they were obliterated, their shattered hulls falling toward the planet below like shooting stars. On the surface, the colonists watched in horror as the sky above them burned. The ground trembled beneath their feet as debris rained down, fiery streaks carving through the atmosphere. But even in the face of such devastation, the people of Haven 7 did not cower. Fear gripped their hearts, but it did not paralyze them. Instead, it ignited something deeper, something primal. Farmers, their hands calloused from years of hard labor, abandoned their fields and rushed to the colony's central square. They carried mining explosives, tools meant for breaking rock, now repurposed into weapons of war. Mechanics, their clothes stained with oil and grease, worked feverishly to transform industrial equipment into makeshift defenses. Welding torches became flamethrowers. Harvester drones were outfitted with blades and spikes. Even the children and the elderly joined the effort, their faces set with grim determination. They carried supplies, patched wounds, and coordinated efforts with a quiet resolve that spoke of a people unwilling to surrender. When the Clyson ground forces descended, they expected an easy victory. Their landing craft touched down in neat formations, their soldiers marching with precision, their weapons gleaming under the light of Haven 7's twin suns. The air was thick with the hum of their machines and the heavy thud of their boots. They spread out across the colony, confident in their superiority, prepared to crush any resistance. But what they found was not fear. What they found was fury. The first wave of Clyson soldiers entered the colony's outskirts, their sharp, insectoid forms moving with the fluid grace of predators. They advanced cautiously, their weapons raised, scanning for signs of movement. The streets were eerily quiet, the buildings seemingly abandoned. Then, without warning, the ground erupted beneath their feet. Farmers, hidden in the fields, triggered explosives buried in the soil, sending plumes of dirt and fire into the air. The Clyson soldiers were thrown into disarray, their disciplined ranks breaking as panic set in. From the shadows of the buildings, the colonists emerged. They fought with whatever they had: axes, hammers, even kitchen knives. Every building became a fortress, its windows bristling with makeshift weapons. Every street became a battlefield, its narrow confines forcing the Clyson to fight hand to hand. The humans fought with a desperation born of love for their families, their homes, their way of life. An elderly woman, her face lined with age, stood atop a barricade made of overturned carts and crates. In her hands, she held a crude flamethrower, its flames roaring as she drove back a squad of Clyson soldiers. Nearby, a group of teenagers worked together to topple a Clyson walker, their shouts of triumph echoing as the machine crashed to the ground. The Clyson, for all their advanced technology and superior training, were shaken. They had expected submission, not defiance. They had expected fear, not courage. The humans fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness, their attacks relentless, their resolve unbreakable. Supreme Commander Razak watched the battle unfold from the bridge of his flagship, his expression darkening with each passing moment. The humans were supposed to be weak, their colony an easy target. But this was chaos. His claws tightened around the edge of the tactical display, his yellow eyes narrowing as he studied the unfolding disaster. On the surface, the battle raged on. The colonists, outnumbered and outgunned, refused to yield. They fought with the knowledge that every second they held the Clyson at bay was another second for their loved ones to find safety, another second for hope to endure. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the battlefield in deep shadows, the colony still stood. Fires burned in the distance, their smoke curling into the darkening sky. The air was thick with the scent of ash and blood, the cries of the wounded mingling with the clash of weapons. And yet, amidst the destruction, there was a strange beauty, a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity. The people of Haven 7, farmers and mechanics and children alike, had shown the Clyson something they could not understand. They had shown them the strength of a people united, the power of a love so fierce it could defy even the darkest of odds. The battle was far from over, but one thing was clear: the Clyson had underestimated their enemy. And in doing so, they had awakened something far greater than they could have ever imagined. The air in Haven 7's command center was thick with tension, the walls trembling faintly with each distant explosion. Sparks rained from damaged consoles, casting brief flashes of light across the grim faces of the colony's defenders. Captain Elias Drayden stood at the center of the chaos, his uniform torn and blood-stained, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Yet, there was no hesitation in his movements as he leaned over the communications console, his fingers trembling slightly as he keyed in the transmission. "This is Haven 7, he began, his voice hoarse but steady. The sounds of battle echoed faintly in the background: screams, the rumble of collapsing buildings, the sharp crack of laser fire. He paused for a moment, his throat tightening as he glanced at the live feed from the surface. The images flickered and distorted, but the scenes were unmistakable: civilians fighting in the streets, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat, their eyes burning with defiance. "We are under attack," Elias continued, his voice rising slightly as desperation crept into his tone. "Civilians are fighting, but we won't last long. Please," his voice cracked, but he pressed on, his jaw tightening as he forced the words out. "Please, Send help. The transmission ended, the faint hum of the console filling the silence that followed. Elias stood motionless for a moment, his hands still resting on the controls. He closed his eyes, drawing in a shaky breath as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. Around him, the command staff worked frantically, their voices low and urgent, but Elias barely heard them. His thoughts were with the people outside, those who had taken up arms to defend their home, knowing full well that help might never come. Far away, aboard the human flagship Resolute, the transmission reached Admiral Saran Valen. The command deck of the Resolute was a stark contrast to the chaos of Haven 7. It was a place of order and precision, its gleaming surfaces and disciplined crew reflecting the strength of the human fleet. But as the desperate words of Captain Drayden played over the speakers, a heavy silence fell over the room. Admiral Valen stood at the center of the bridge, her tall, imposing figure framed by the glowing tactical displays that surrounded her. Her silver hair was tied back tightly, and her sharp blue eyes were fixed on the console in front of her, unblinking as she listened to the message. The faint lines of age and experience on her face deepened as her jaw clenched, her expression hardening with each passing second. When the transmission ended, she remained silent for a moment, her gaze distant as if she were staring through the walls of the ship into the void beyond. The crew watched her anxiously, their movements hesitant as they awaited her orders. Finally, she straightened, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Mobilize every available ship," she commanded, her tone firm and unyielding. "We don't leave our people behind." The bridge sprang to life at her words. Officers moved with purpose, their voices sharp and focused as they relayed orders and coordinated the fleet. The hum of the ship's engines grew louder, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to echo the determination that now filled the room. Admiral Valen turned to face the main viewport, her hands clasped behind her back as she stared out into the vast expanse of space. In the distance, the faint glimmers of stars shone like scattered diamonds, their cold light a stark reminder of the fragility of life in the void. She thought of Haven 7, of the men and women fighting for their lives on that distant world. She could picture them in her mind, the farmers wielding crude weapons, the mechanics turning their tools into instruments of war, the children and elders working tirelessly to support the defenders. She could feel their fear, their desperation, but also their courage, the unyielding spirit that refused to be broken. "They are buying time," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Her voice was softer now, tinged with a quiet resolve. "We won't waste it." The fleet began to move, the massive vessels shifting into formation as they prepared to jump to Haven 7's coordinates. The Resolute led the way, its engines flaring as it surged forward, its sleek form cutting through the darkness like a spear. Admiral Valen's gaze remained fixed on the stars, her expression unreadable. But deep within her, a fire burned, a fierce determination to protect her people, to answer their call for help no matter the cost. Back on Haven 7, Captain Drayden stood in the command center, his eyes fixed on the console. The transmission had been sent, but there was no way to know if it had been received or if help would arrive in time. Outside, the battle raged on. The colonists fought with everything they had, their courage and determination shining like a beacon in the darkness. And though the odds were against them, they held the line, refusing to give in to despair. Because in their hearts, they believed that someone was coming. That somewhere out there, beyond the stars, their plea for help had been heard. The Clyson fleet drifted above the smoldering remains of Haven 7, their victory marked by the eerie silence that followed the battle. Fires still burned on the planet's surface, their orange glow visible even from orbit. The Clyson commanders reveled in their triumph, their alien voices chittering in celebration as they reviewed the destruction they had wrought. To them, Haven 7 was a testament to their power, a warning to any who dared oppose them. But their celebration was fleeting, like the calm before a storm. It began as whispers, reports of human ships appearing on the edges of Clyson territory. At first, the Clyson dismissed these sightings as mere rumors, the desperate flailing of a defeated enemy. But the whispers grew louder, and soon, they could no longer be ignored. The humans struck without warning. Their ships moved like shadows, slipping through the darkness of space with a predatory grace. They targeted isolated Clyson vessels, lone patrols, and vulnerable supply lines. The Clyson, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with brute force, found themselves outmatched in this new kind of warfare. A small Clyson freighter, its hull gleaming under the light of a distant star, drifted through the void, its crew unaware of the danger stalking them. Without warning, the darkness erupted. Human ships emerged from the blackness, their weapons blazing. The freighter's shields crumbled under the assault, its hull splitting apart as explosions rippled through it. Before reinforcements could arrive, the human ships vanished, leaving nothing but debris and silence in their wake. This pattern repeated itself across Clyson space. Human ships struck with ruthless efficiency, their attacks precise and devastating. They left no survivors, no chance for the Clyson to regroup or retaliate. To the Clyson, it was as if the humans had become something more than mortal, a force of vengeance, relentless and unyielding. On the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Saran Valen stood before her fleet, her presence commanding and unshakable. The room was dimly lit, the faces of her officers illuminated by the cold blue glow of tactical displays. A heavy silence hung in the air as they awaited her words. "This isn't just a war," Valen began, her voice low but carrying an edge of steel. She stepped forward, her sharp gaze sweeping across the room, meeting the eyes of each officer in turn. "This is a reckoning. Every person who died on Haven 7, every farmer, every child, every soul who stood and fought will be avenged." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their meaning. The officers nodded, their expressions hardening with resolve. They had all seen the footage of Haven 7's destruction, had heard the desperate pleas for help that had come too late. The memory of that loss burned within them, fueling their determination. Valen turned to the main viewport, her hands clasped behind her back as she stared out into the endless expanse of space. "The Clyson thought they could break us," she continued, her voice rising. "They thought they could crush our spirit. But they were wrong. We are not broken. We are not defeated. We are hunters now, and they are the prey." The fleet moved with purpose, their engines flaring as they spread out across Clyson territory. Each ship carried the weight of Haven 7's memory, each crew driven by a singular purpose, to make the Clyson pay for what they had done. In the depths of Clyson space, a massive warship floated in orbit around a barren moon. Its crew went about their duties, unaware of the danger closing in. The human ships struck with terrifying precision, their weapons tearing through the warship's defenses like paper. The Clyson crew fought desperately, but it was no use. The warship's hull split apart, its shattered remains falling toward the moon below. The humans left no trace of their presence, their ships vanishing into the void as quickly as they had appeared. But the message was clear: no Clyson was safe. The Clyson High Command convened in secret, their voices filled with unease as they discussed the growing threat. The humans were no longer the scattered, desperate survivors they had faced on Haven 7. They had become something else, something far more dangerous. And as the Clyson debated their next move, the humans continued their hunt, striking fear into the hearts of their enemies with every attack. For Admiral Valen, this was more than a mission. It was a promise, a vow to the people of Haven 7, to those who had fallen and those who had fought. She would not stop until the Clyson understood the price of their actions, until they felt the same fear and despair they had inflicted on others. And so, the hunt continued, the humans moving like shadows across the stars, their vengeance burning brighter than any sun. In the cold silence of space, where stars burned indifferent to the struggles of mortals, humanity's voice rose like a haunting echo, unrelenting and impossible to ignore. Across the galactic networks, the broadcasts began. They were simple at first, just a black screen, and then a single name appeared in stark white letters. Lila Carter, age 6. A pause. Then, a soft, trembling voice spoke, breaking the silence. She loved to draw. Her favorite color was yellow. She wanted to be a teacher when she grew up. The screen shifted, revealing the face of a little girl with bright, curious eyes and a shy smile. Her image lingered for a moment, and then it faded, replaced by another name. Marcus Harlow, age 72. The voice continued, steady but heavy with sorrow. He was a farmer. He spent his life growing food to feed his people. He had 3 grandchildren. He died defending his home. One by one, the names appeared. Each one was a life lost on Haven 7, each face a reminder of the price humanity had paid. Dr. Ulrich Chen, age 34. A scientist who had worked tirelessly to improve life on the colony. David Reyes, age 19. A boy who had picked up a weapon for the first time to protect his family. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. The broadcasts were impossible to ignore, transmitted across every major channel, every corner of known space. No matter where you were, no matter who you were, the faces of Haven 7 stared back at you, their stories told with quiet, devastating clarity. The Clyson Empire was no exception. Their leaders watched the broadcasts in grim silence, their alien features unreadable but their unease palpable. The names and faces of the dead were not just a message, they were a weapon. Humanity had turned its grief into a blade, and it was cutting deep into the heart of the Clyson Empire. For the Clyson soldiers, the broadcasts were unbearable. They had been taught to see humans as weak, as insignificant. But now, as they watched the faces of children, elders, and families, they felt the weight of what they had done. The guilt was like a shadow, creeping into their minds and poisoning their resolve. In the darkened halls of Clyson warships, whispers began to spread. Soldiers questioned their orders, their loyalty wavering under the crushing weight of the broadcasts. Some refused to fight, their weapons falling from trembling hands. Others deserted entirely, unable to bear the shame of what they had become a part of. The fractures in the Clyson Empire grew deeper with each passing day. Entire fleets hesitated to engage the human forces, their morale crumbling under the relentless assault of guilt and fear. The once mighty empire, so confident in its superiority, now found itself haunted by the faces of its victims. But for humanity, this was not just about vengeance. The broadcasts were a way to ensure that the galaxy would never forget Haven 7. They were a declaration, a reminder that every life lost had meaning, that every name spoken carried the weight of a story that deserved to be told. On the Resolute, Admiral Saran Valen watched one of the broadcasts in silence. The face of Lila Carter lingered on the screen, her small, innocent smile a stark contrast to the horrors she had faced. Valen's hands clenched at her sides, her jaw tight as she forced herself to look, to remember. "This is who we fight for," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is why we cannot stop." Her words echoed in the hearts of her crew, their determination hardening like steel. They knew that the broadcasts were more than just a weapon, they were a promise. A promise that humanity would not be silenced, that their grief would not be forgotten. As the broadcasts continued, the galaxy began to shift. Neutral factions, horrified by the atrocities committed on Haven 7, began to withdraw their support for the Clyson Empire. Trade routes closed, alliances crumbled, and the Clyson found themselves increasingly isolated. The weight of guilt and fear pressed down on the Empire like a storm, relentless and unforgiving. And in the midst of it all, humanity stood unbroken, their voices rising like a chorus across the stars. The broadcasts ended the same way each time. The screen would fade to black, and then a single message would appear in stark white letters. We remember. Do you? It was not just a question, it was a challenge. A warning. And for the Clyson, it was a reminder that their actions would not be forgotten, that their empire would never escape the shadow of Haven 7. The galaxy watched, and the Clyson trembled. The hunt was no longer just physical, it was psychological, a battle fought not with weapons, but with the unyielding force of memory and truth. And humanity, driven by their grief and their unbreakable will, was winning. In the dim, flickering light of the Clyson command chamber, Razak stood, his towering figure casting long shadows across the room. His once proud fleet was now a ghost of what it had been, broken ships scattered across the stars, their wreckage drifting silently in the void. Reports of desertions and mutinies piled on his desk like a mountain of shame. The weight of failure pressed heavily on his shoulders, but his eyes burned with a desperate resolve. He turned to his remaining officers, their alien forms hunched and weary, their eyes avoiding his. The room was suffocating with tension, the air thick with unspoken fears. Razak's voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp and commanding. We cannot let this humiliation continue, he growled, his tone brimming with anger and desperation. The humans are tearing us apart, piece by piece. Their broadcasts poison the minds of our people. Their ships strike from the shadows, and we are powerless to stop them. He slammed a clawed hand onto the table, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. The officers flinched but said nothing. Razak's gaze swept over them, his expression fierce. There is only one way to end this, he declared. A direct assault on their home world. Earth? The officers exchanged uneasy glances, their hesitation clear. One of them, a younger commander with trembling hands, dared to speak. Earth is heavily defended, Supreme Commander. Such an attack, it would be suicide. Razak's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. If we take their home world, they will have no choice but to negotiate. Their spirit will break, just as Haven 7 broke beneath our might. The room fell silent. The officers knew the plan was madness, but they also knew they had no other options. Their empire was crumbling, and Razak's desperation was their last hope. Slowly, reluctantly, they nodded. Razak straightened, his chest swelling with grim determination. Prepare the fleet, he ordered. We will strike at the heart of humanity. We will show them the true power of the Clyson Empire. But far away, in the depths of human space, Admiral Saran Valen stood aboard the Resolute, her sharp eyes fixed on the tactical display before her. She had anticipated Razak's move, had seen the desperation in his actions and the cracks in his empire. Let him come, she said, her voice cold and unyielding. Her officers stood silently behind her, their faces set with grim determination. We'll be ready. Valen's words were not a boast, they were a promise. The Clyson fleet emerged from hyperspace in the shadow of Earth, their massive warships cutting through the darkness like predators stalking their prey. The blue-green planet hung before them, serene and beautiful, its surface glowing softly in the light of its sun. For a moment, there was silence and eerie calm before the storm. Razak stood on the bridge of his flagship, his eyes locked on the image of Earth. Victory seemed so close, almost within his grasp. He could already see the flames consuming the human cities, the cries of their people echoing through the void. Begin the assault, he ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos brewing in his mind. But before the Clyson ships could fire, the darkness around them shifted. Shapes emerged from the void, one by one, until the stars themselves seemed to vanish behind the sheer number of human warships. Hundreds of them, sleek and deadly, surrounded the Clyson fleet in a perfect, unbreakable circle. Razak's officers froze, their confidence evaporating in an instant. Panic rippled through the Clyson ranks as the realization set in they were trapped. On the main view screen, a figure appeared. Admiral Saran Valen stood tall, her expression calm but unrelenting. Her eyes, sharp as daggers, bore into Razak's, and her voice was like ice. "You're not here to negotiate," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. "You're here to surrender?" Razak's jaw tightened, his claws digging into the armrests of his chair. "Never," he spat, his voice dripping with defiance. Valen's expression didn't change. "Then you leave me no choice." The battle began in an instant, a storm of fire and fury. Human ships moved with precision, their formations flawless, their weapons striking with deadly accuracy. The Clyson fleet, already weakened and demoralized, stood no chance. Their ships were torn apart, one by one, their fiery remains scattering across the void. Razak's flagship shuddered as explosions rippled through its hull. Alarms blared, and the bridge was bathed in red light. His officers shouted over the chaos, their voices filled with panic, but Razak remained seated, his hands gripping the armrests, his eyes fixed on the image of Earth. He had failed. The end came swiftly. Human ships breached the flagship's defenses, their weapons disabling its engines and weapons systems. Razak's crews surrendered, their will to fight crushed beneath the weight of their defeat. Razak himself was taken prisoner, his once imposing figure now slumped in defeat. As he was escorted from the bridge, he cast one last glance at the view screen, where Earth still hung, untouched and unbroken. On the Resolute, Valen watched as the remnants of the Clyson fleet were destroyed. The battle had been swift and decisive, just as she had planned. She turned to her officers, her voice calm but resolute. "This is the end of the Clyson Empire," she said. "But it is not the end of our fight. We will ensure that no one forgets what happened on Haven 7. And we will make certain that no one dares to threaten humanity again." The officers nodded, their expressions grim but determined. They knew the cost of their victory, the lives lost and the scars left behind. But they also knew that they had done what needed to be done. And as the human fleet regrouped, the stars around Earth burned brighter, a testament to humanity's resilience and unyielding will. The Clyson Empire had fallen, and Earth remained, a fortress in the void, unbroken and defiant. The chamber was vast, its walls carved from cold, unyielding stone. The air inside was heavy, oppressive, as if the weight of countless lives lost pressed down on everyone present. At the center of the room stood Razak, the former supreme commander of the Clyson Empire. His once imposing figure, draped in the regal armor of his rank, now seemed smaller, diminished. His shoulders sagged under the invisible burden of guilt and defeat. The tribunal was silent, save for the soft rustle of papers and the steady hum of distant machinery. Rows of human officials sat behind a long, crescent-shaped table, their faces grim and unrelenting. Behind them, holographic images of Haven 7 flickered against the shadows, images of destruction, of burning homes, and of lifeless bodies scattered across the ground. A human voice broke the silence, calm yet piercing. "We will now read the names of the deceased from Haven 7. Razak flinched but said nothing. His clawed hands trembled slightly, though he clasped them tightly behind his back, trying to maintain the last shreds of his dignity. Lila Carter, age 6. The name hung in the air like a ghost, and Razak felt a pang deep in his chest. He had heard her name before, seen her face in the human broadcasts. A child, innocent and full of life, now reduced to a name on a list. Marcus Harlow, age 72. The voice continued, steady and unrelenting, as name after name was spoken. Each one was a blade, cutting deeper into Razak's already fractured soul. He could see their faces in his mind, faces he had never met, lives he had never known, but whose deaths he had caused. Dr. Ilra Chen, age 34. Razak's breathing grew heavier, his composure crumbling. He closed his eyes, but the names still reached him, each one a reminder of the horrors he had unleashed. When the reading finally ended, the silence that followed was deafening. Razak opened his eyes, his gaze falling to the floor. He couldn't bring himself to look at the humans before him, nor at the faces of the victims projected around the room. "I should have listened to the warning," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The tribunal's lead official leaned forward, her expression cold and unforgiving. "What warning?" Razak's claws dug into his palms as he spoke, his voice trembling with regret. "When we first encountered your kind, we saw you as weak, fragile. We thought you would break easily under our power." He paused, his throat tightening. "But we were wrong. Your broadcasts, your resilience, they showed us what we truly faced. You warned us, through your grief and your defiance. I should have listened. I should have stopped." His words hung in the air, heavy with regret and futility. But the humans remained silent, their faces unreadable. Razak knew that no apology, no admission of guilt, could ever undo what he had done. The tribunal's verdict was swift and final. Razak would spend the rest of his days imprisoned, a living reminder of the Clyson Empire's downfall. As he was led away, the names of Haven 7's dead echoed in his mind, haunting him with every step. The Clyson Empire's surrender came swiftly, their once mighty fleets scattered and their leaders broken. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. For centuries, the Clyson had been a symbol of dominance, their empire feared and respected by all. But now, they were a shadow of their former selves, brought to their knees by the very species they had underestimated. The surrender was unconditional. Every planet, every outpost, every soldier still loyal to the Empire laid down their arms. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the Clyson banners were lowered, replaced by the stark, unyielding symbol of humanity's justice. For other species, the message was clear. Humanity, once seen as a minor player in the galactic stage, had proven themselves to be far more than anyone had imagined. They were resilient, resourceful, and, when provoked, utterly unstoppable. It wasn't long before the galaxy's leaders began to speak out. Treaties were rewritten, alliances reformed, all with one goal in mind, to ensure that humanity was never provoked again. In the midst of this upheaval, a final message echoed across the stars. It came from Elder Myroth, one of the galaxy's oldest and most respected figures. His voice, weathered by centuries of wisdom, carried a weight that no one could ignore. "Humans are peaceful when left alone," he said, his tone measured and deliberate. "They seek no conquest, no domination. Their hearts are filled with a desire to build, to create, to live in harmony with the universe." He paused, his voice growing softer, yet more intense. "But when you harm their families, when you threaten their very existence, they become something else entirely. They become justice itself. Relentless. Unyielding. And when they rise, they do so not for power, but for the memory of those they have lost." The message resonated deeply across the galaxy. It was not a warning, nor a threat, it was a truth, spoken plainly and without malice. And in its simplicity, it carried a power that no weapon could match. On Earth, humanity mourned their dead, their grief a quiet but unshakable force. Monuments were built, their surfaces etched with the names of those who had fallen on Haven 7. The broadcasts that had once been a weapon of psychological warfare became a testament to resilience, a reminder of the cost of peace. And as the stars turned, the galaxy remembered. The Clyson Empire's fall was not just a victory for humanity, it was a lesson for all. A lesson that even the smallest spark, when threatened, could become an inferno. In the quiet of space, where the echoes of war began to fade, humanity stood unbroken. Their message was clear, their will unshakable. And the galaxy, wiser now than it had been before, vowed never to forget. The air on Haven 7 was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. The sky, once darkened by the fires of war, now stretched endlessly above, painted in hues of gold and violet as the sun began to set. Beneath its glow stood the memorial, a towering wall of black stone, polished to a mirror-like finish. It reflected the faces of those who gathered, their expressions etched with sorrow and reverence. The wall bore thousands of names, each one painstakingly carved into the stone, their letters glowing faintly in the fading light. These were not just names, they were lives, stories, dreams that had been extinguished too soon. Families stood before the wall, their fingers tracing the engraved letters, as if by touch they could reach across the void and feel the presence of their lost loved ones. A young woman knelt at the base of the wall, her trembling hand resting on a name, Lila Carter. Her other hand clutched a small stuffed bear, its fur worn and faded. Tears streamed silently down her face, but her grief was quiet, almost reverent. Beside her, an older man placed a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes red-rimmed but resolute. "They didn't die for nothing," he whispered, his voice breaking the stillness. "They saved us all." Nearby, a mother held her son close, pointing to the name of her husband. The boy, no older than 10, stared at the wall with wide, tearful eyes. "Will Dad ever come back?" he asked softly. The mother's voice trembled as she replied, "No, sweetheart. But he's here, with us. In our hearts. And he's a hero." Candles lined the base of the memorial, their flames flickering gently in the breeze. Flowers of every color were scattered across the ground, their petals a stark contrast against the dark stone. Some families brought offerings, photos, letters, trinkets that had belonged to the fallen. Others simply stood in silence, their heads bowed, their grief too deep for words. In the center of the memorial stood a single statue, towering above the wall. It depicted a lone figure, a soldier holding a child in one arm while raising a torch with the other. The torch's flame burned eternally, a symbol of hope and resilience. Beneath the statue was an inscription, simple yet profound. Asterisk, for those who gave everything, so that we could have tomorrow. Asterisk. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the crowd began to sing softly, their voices blending into a haunting melody. The song was one of remembrance, its words carrying the weight of loss but also the promise of healing. The sound rose into the night, carried on the wind, as if the stars themselves were listening. And though the pain of their loss would never fully fade, the families of Haven 7 found solace in the knowledge that justice had been served. The names on the wall were not forgotten, they were immortalized, their sacrifice a beacon of light in the darkness. The galaxy shifted, as if the very fabric of its existence had been rewoven. The scars of war lingered, but from them grew something new, a fragile yet undeniable peace. For the first time in centuries, the endless cycle of conquest and retaliation slowed, replaced by a cautious respect that spanned the stars. It was not fear that held the galaxy in balance, but understanding. Humanity's unyielding spirit, their unity in the face of unimaginable loss, had left an indelible mark on every species that had witnessed their rise. The fall of the Clyson Empire was not just a victory for Earth, it was a lesson for all. On distant worlds, leaders gathered to rewrite laws and forge new alliances. Treaties were signed, their words laced with a promise of cooperation rather than domination. Even the most warlike species, those who had once thrived on conflict, began to reconsider their ways. The memory of Haven 7, and the justice that followed, was a constant reminder of the cost of arrogance. Elder Myratha's words echoed across the galaxy, repeated in council chambers, classrooms, and homes. Humans are peaceful when left alone. But when you harm their families, they become justice itself. These words became a mantra, a warning spoken not with malice, but with reverence. Humanity had proven that their strength was not in their weapons, but in their unity, their unbreakable resolve to protect what they held dear. On Earth, life slowly returned to normal, though the memory of the war lingered in every corner. Children grew up learning the stories of Haven 7, not as tales of vengeance, but as lessons in resilience and the value of peace. The monuments stood as silent guardians, their presence a reminder of the sacrifices made and the future that had been secured. Among the stars, humanity's reputation grew. They were no longer seen as fragile newcomers, but as equals partners in the great tapestry of the galaxy. Other species began to approach Earth not with demands, but with offers of friendship. Trade routes flourished, cultural exchanges blossomed, and for the first time, the galaxy felt smaller, more connected. But beneath this newfound harmony lay a quiet understanding. The warning was never forgotten. Humanity had shown the galaxy what they were capable of when pushed to the brink. And while they extended their hand in friendship, the fire that had consumed the Clyson Empire still burned within them, ready to rise again if ever provoked. As the years passed, the galaxy entered a new era, one of cautious peace, built not on fear, but on respect. And in the vast, endless expanse of space, the stars shone brighter, as if to honor the unity that had been forged in the fires of loss and hope. Humanity, once underestimated, now stood as a beacon of what the galaxy could become. And though the future remained uncertain, one truth was clear: the lesson of Haven 7 would never be ignored again.